All right, everyone. Hello. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast, your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. I'm Robert Winfrey. I am your host. We're going to be talking about the event that was UFC 244. That's going to take up like the lion's share of the podcast today, I think, because that was the UFC's 500th live event, and in many respects, it did not disappoint. So we've got a lot to kind of break down in the aftermath of that event. Next week, the UFC is in Moscow for UFC on ESPN plus 21. And that card, well, when they lost JDS, they lost basically the most interesting part of that event. So we'll go over what exists on it and do the preview thing to the extent that we can. And a little bit of news over the last week. I mean, relatively quiet on the news front, but a few things propped up, so we'll get through that. You all know the drill by now, unless you're a newcomer, in which case, thank you. God bless. We tend to do fights, and then news. All right, here with me is my regular partner in crime, 411 Mania's jack of all trades, and the man who I imagine part of your soul died when watching Playing with Fire. Jeff Harris is with us. How are you, Jeff?
Worse. Frank. And yes, Joanna Jandrejczyk, I am confident about waking up in the morning. So thank you for asking.
Alrighty. Let's go ahead and jump into this then. UFC 244, our main event was the unofficial title fight for the BMF belt. It ends between rounds 3 and 4 when the doctor stops the fight on behalf of Jorge Masvidal. Nate Diaz just had a couple of cuts that prompted the stoppage. I know people were not happy about this. Thankfully, a lot of the ire seems to have died down after everyone slept on it.
Thankfully, it died for Dana White before he got to the press conference, because as amusing as that could have been. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, Dana's stance was initially like, oh, that's BS, and then his whole claim, and it's Dana, so you can take this with however much salt you feel necessary, was, I got a closer look at Nate's cuts and went, okay, I can see it. That was kind of my stance, and I mean, the fight itself was, this is going to get lost in a lot of people being upset about the stoppage, and the Diaz fanboy army is going to be out in force going, if not for that stoppage, he always comes on strong in the 4th and 5th rounds. I mean, okay, look, I'm not saying that's impossible. Nate Diaz has tremendous cardio, and he tends to excel in the longer a fight goes. I'm not taking anything away from that. But he got beat from pillar to freaking post.
Getting dominated on the ground.
I mean, I had Jorge Masvidal up 30-25 after 3 rounds. I gave him a 10-8 in the first and the second. He floored Diaz with that head kick in the first, pounded on him, cut him open. That's where the whole cut started, and then it just got worse and worse as the fight went on. He drops him again in the second with punches. He was killing Nate with body kicks. I don't know what he saw in film, but that body kick he was slamming in over and over again was that hurt me watching it. Just ow.
I guess for Diaz's credit, he was hanging in there and he was still firing back. He was landing good shots at point. He was in the fight.
Yeah, he was in the fight. He
didn't look tired, and he didn't really look tired either. That was the other thing.
No, he didn't look gassed. I mean, again, he landed punches on occasion. He was able to force a few exchanges that were favorable to him. But Masvidal was very well prepared to fight in the clinch, which is normally a place Diaz is able to do quite well. He was good about landing elbows and knees on the break.
Brown was well scouted. He didn't jump into Diaz's guard when Diaz was goading him in there. And when Diaz had that one, they had that one little good ground exchange where there was that sweep. Do you remember that?
Yeah, in the second round. They had a really nice little scramble there at the end.
Diaz tried to go for that leg bar or whatever, and Masvidal had no trouble defending it, really. It didn't look like he was in any danger there. I don't think he was.
He wasn't really. I mean, I don't mean to say that situation couldn't have been worse if Jorge never addressed it. But as soon as Nate kind of leans back for the heel hook, Masvidal spins appropriately, gets a lot of weight on the knee. Nate has no control over his other knee, which is like actual control over your opponent's lower body is critical to heel hook success, and Nate didn't have it.
Good, so he wasn't the body too. Very good.
Yeah. This wound up being, again, I picked Masvidal to win. This was more one-sided than I think most people expected. Masvidal pushed his face through a windshield, basically. By the end of that, by the time that fight was stopped.
I guess because of the optics, because, you know, it was Masvidal's fight up until it got stopped, but Diaz was still in there and coming back, asking for more.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, if you want to get Nate out of there, you have to really get him out of there, you know? Like, I give him all the credit in the world for being that kind of fighter and that kind of person. Like,
when was the last time Diaz was legit knocked out?
Stopped? It's only happened once. It was the Josh Thompson fight, because Thompson kicked him in the head like 3 times before he fell over.
So that was quite a while ago. And then
15 or 16, I think.
And Masvidal has quite a, I mean, just in MMA alone, has quite a long career. So,
yeah, both guys are nearing 50 fights. I think this was Masvidal's 48th professional fight. It was.
Masvidal only has three stoppage losses in his career. So Hadhigo Dam and Sengoku, and that was
way back in the day.
So June 2008.
Tobi Yamada.
Bellator, okay.
But that crazy inverted triangle, man, that's one of the craziest submissions you'll ever see.
At the time, Yamada was a pretty formidable opponent and submission artist, I would say. And earlier in his career by Paul Rodriguez, and so Masvidal is you really don't finish Masvidal, especially he's never been finished in his UFC career.
Your game plan should not revolve around being the first guy in the UFC to finish him at nothing else.
Well, right. Masvidal's both these guys are among the tougher opponents you will face because they're always going to be there. I mean, he didn't beat Gilbert Melendez, but when Melendez was one of the best lightweights in the world, he gave Melendez some problems in their fight. In their fight.
I mean, he gave Benson Henderson a lot of problems in their fight. He's just a tough out. I mean, he arguably won the Damian Maia fight. I seem to recall thinking he should have. I mean, I was doing live.
I don't know if I would anoint him fighter of the year, but I think he's had a pretty damn good year, all things.
At the moment, I think it's a 2-horse race between him and Israel Adesanya.
The thing is, but here's my issue with that. I feel like the Till and Diaz fights were favorable matchups for him, really.
Diaz, yes. I'm not sure about. I mean, Till in practice wound up being more favorable, but I'm not sure on paper Till's a. Again, that fight didn't play out the way a lot of people expected.
He has had a very good year. I'm just not sure. Fighter of the year, I'm a little.
Well, again, for me, look, there's still a few other events. There's a big pay-per-view still to come, but at the moment,
it could be Colby Covington.
I don't think there's a very specific reason I don't think I would put Colby above him, and some of that is just numbers. Like Masvidal fought and won 3 times in the same calendar year. He finished all 3 of his opponents. And he's the one who main evented the biggest event of the year. I would even, and in all honesty, I'd rank Adesanya above Covington, even if Covington wins.
Yeah. Oh, I would give it to probably Adesanya over Masvidal easily.
Those two are kind of in a 2-horse race for me at the moment. And again, if something really weird happens to cast doubt on them before the end of the year, then I'm happy to rethink it. But because Initially, I thought Masvidal was going to run away with it if he won here, but for some reason, I kind of had a weird memory of the Silva fight taking place in the like November or December of 18, not first bit of 19. So Adesanya's fought 3 times in 19, won all 3 of them, has the fight of the year right now,
He won the title
and became middleweight champion. Yeah, it's kind of down to Masvidal or Adesanya for me right now, and I'm leaning towards Izzy at the moment. But
you beat a guy who was like undefeated at middleweight and one of the best middleweights in the world.
Yeah.
But
yeah, those two have had banner years.
Now look, my initial reaction to the stoppage of this fight was it looked like Diaz could see out of both eyes. It looked like his eye wasn't swollen shut, and I feel like we've seen fights go on with worse cuts and worse eye injuries. And I guess I was a bit surprised, and I wondered if it was New York being overly cautious, or the doctor being when I say New York, I mean the athletic convention, the doctor being overly cautious. I know one fighter, I forget who it was, said something on Twitter about this is the same doctor who said I had a broken leg or something.
That would be Michael Chandler, and the fight he's referencing is when he lost the lightweight title, Bellator's, to Brent Primus.
All right, yeah, thanks for that. So, but then after the fight, I got a closer look at the cut, and it's a really nasty cut. And I'm not a doctor or a medical expert, but I'm kind of not so upset about the fights because it wasn't like an illegal cut. And Masvidal was lighting up his face and Jack Diaz's face up. And could they have let the fight go on? Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, but I mean, I'm not that angry or broken up over this, but I do think it's ironic because I was wondering, like, with everything going on, the UFC was giving all the bells and whistles to this ESPN's promotion. I have never seen UFC go all in and just go so hard for a fight, promoting a fight in really quite some time, Robert.
And, I mean, ditto to ESPN for this one. They put out a lot of promotional material and a lot of, I don't mean this negatively, they did a lot of like storytelling for the history of both Diaz and Masvidal building up to this.
Right. It's rare we see an event built up this much, a fight built up this much. And I'm thinking, wow, wouldn't it be funny? They got The Rock. They have The Rock coming out to do an entrance because he's handing over the BMF belt to the winner. I'm like, what if this ends in like a minute and a half and like a DQ or a no contest, or like there's a cut, someone gets cut or someone's eye gets poked and that's it. And that would be a massive embarrassment. Just
that might have incited a riot, like genuinely.
But you yourself were thinking, man, Diaz gets cut very easily.
Yeah, I didn't say this very much publicly. I think I told a couple of, like, just as a kind of musing aloud thing to a few of my friends, that, especially like as the day wore on, I just kind of went, Diaz's face is more scar tissue than like first generation dermis. And Masvidal, if he's smart, and he is a smart fighter in many, many respects, if he cuts him open, we might see that stop due to that. And I'm not the only one who said this. There were a couple of people who, like publicly or whatnot, said, yeah, I predicted this just because New York's a very, a bit, and for a variety of reasons, and I don't mean this as a huge negative, but they are more inclined to stopping fights due to cuts than other commissions. And we can, that's kind of a thing. Now,
well, just for example, the first Jones-Gustafsson fight in Toronto, the doctors wanted to stop that fighting, which would have given the title to Gustafsson, but John McCarthy said no.
That was a pretty gnarly cut on John in that fight.
And I don't know if that cut. Now, I don't know if that cut was as bad as these cuts to Diaz here.
Okay, it's kind of a weird thing because what do you mean by, and I don't mean you specifically. Like this is just a,
It's just one of those weird things we see in the sports sometimes, you know?
yeah, I mean, what constitutes bad from a fight doctor perspective? There's actually a guy who does a bunch of medical or doctor related stuff pertaining to sports and sports injuries and whatnot, who in the immediate aftermath of this had a video up about the cuts on Diaz, what doctors are looking for. I forget the name of the guy's YouTube channel.
I mean, that's a good thing. I mean, so that's why I'm like, this maybe isn't such a bad thing this happened. Because I don't know the severity. I'm not a doctor. I don't know the severity of the cut and what was going on and what was being looked at. Other than the visual optics that, okay, Diaz looks okay. It looks like he can see out of both eyes. His eyes not swollen shut. Maybe they should let it go. But again, I'm not an expert or a doctor, so that's why I'm not so upset about this.
Well, there's a few things that play into this beyond just can you see out of the eye. Like
Right.
that's your ability to see is important and is certainly a primary consideration. But I know a lot of people.
Skull, where like his skull can get exposed. Like I'm thinking, yeah, they should probably stop it. I don't know.
And again, I don't know if there was exposed bone. If there is, and they said, "Oh, I can see your skull. We're going to stop the fight." Hey, that's fine by me, man. Exposed bone is one of those things that okay, we can stop this.
Because
I know
you can like cover up a cut with Vaseline, but you're not allowed to medically treat. You're not allowed to like medically treat injuries inside in a fight setting, correct?
depends on what you mean by medically treat.
Well, like you can't sew something up, or
you can't do stitches. But what they tend to do is utilize. Cutmen have access to a variety of like minor of chemical things that will help induce coagulation and restrict and constrict blood flow to the area to stop it from bleeding. You see that a lot.
There's treatment they're not allowed to do, right?
Well, I mean, stitching up a wound takes time. Like you have 1 minute between rounds.
But what can they not apply? What are they not allowed to apply to the cut to treat the cut?
I don't know. That would be kind of a commission by commission thing. Again, most of them have access to some kind of coagulant.
Okay.
A lot of times they use like adrenaline or epinephrine byproducts because what those do when you take them is they actually constrict blood vessels. And again, this doctor's video on this is very helpful. He has one on the Tyson Fury cut where he goes into slightly more detail about the kinds of things you do. Frequently, you apply a lot of pressure to help stop the bleeding. You'll get your coagulant of some variety into the area to help facilitate clotting and stop the actual blood flow. And you use an end swell kind of thing to reduce swelling and kind of move it and disincentivize the skin from inflammation. And then you apply Vaseline not to restrict, not to kind of stop blood flow, but to make the surface of the cut very, very smooth so that if you get hit, you're more likely to glance or slide rather than catch and tear anything on it.
I gotta say, though, I was very impressed with the work Masvidal did here. I think he just used his range and kickboxing distance very well. I think he just engaged Diaz at all the right times. He was clearly using a lot of power, but he wasn't gassing or overextending himself, and he knew how to deal with Diaz, on the ground and not letting Diaz's sort of trash talk or just sort of attitude sort of get to him and make him fight stupid, as people who fight Diaz sometimes do. So I think it was a very impressive performance, and I think he has to be in the title mix at least. I'm not sure. I'd be fine if he gets the next title shot against the Covington-Usman winner. That fight makes sense right now.
Some of that will depend on who wins out of Covington and Usman. I think if Colby wins and there's not it's not a fluky, bad, and I say fluky, it's not a wonky kind of finish. If Colby wins and there's not, a foul or some egregious error on the part of the referee kind of thing. The heat that Masvidal and Colby have at the moment, the way they've been kind of talking about each other and building that up, I think that's probably the direction they'll go. Usman,
only other guy is Leon Edwards.
Yeah, I mean, Masvidal is, if Masvidal wants the next title shot, he gets it, in my estimation. Like, and I have no issue with that either.
After this fight, I don't think they're going to be doing an immediate Diaz-Masvidal rematch, just based on Dana White's own statements. And I just feel like I feel like this is the biggest Masvidal's ever going to be in his career. You have to capitalize on that.
Yeah, it's kind of, I know I know both Masvidal and Diaz would sign for a rematch. That's the kind of fighters they are. But I think I kind of agree with you. If you're the UFC and you have this guy win, and again, this was not a fight where he was, he landed a lucky punch that caused a fight-ending cut and he was losing the fight. This was not a, opening minutes kind of thing. They fought for 3 rounds. And it was, and I don't mean to say that Nate Diaz never had any moments of success, because he did. But this wound up not being as much of a competitive fight. Like, right. Masvidal was running away with this in a lot of ways.
I agree. So, and reporters even asked him last night, or one reporter did, at the press conference, would you step up to face Covington or Usman if something happens in December? And he didn't say no. But he did say, UFC is going to have to sign a big check for me to do it, basically.
If I'm him and you have to do that kind of turnaround for either of those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, look, man, get paid. Like, I'm not going to hold that against Jorge at all.
Other than that, I think he has to wait for the title shot. I think that's the only fight for him to take next, unless he's that adamant about a Diaz rematch. But,
I mean, if Masvidal really kind of digs his heels in and says, no, I want a rematch, I think they'll accommodate that.
Right.
But I don't think that's the direction the UFC kind of wants to go. I mean, I think you're exactly right. This card, and before we get into the other fights, this is one of the most surreal experiences I've had watching an MMA event. Just let me put this in just to kind of throw everything out that occurred around this card. We've been to New York enough at this point that an event in Madison Square Garden is not the kind of groundbreaking thing it was when New York was the only state where the sport wasn't legal. But it's still a big deal. There's a lot of nostalgia attached to Madison Square Garden. You had a gimmick title fight, and I'm not saying that's a positive or a negative, but that is something the UFC has not done in a really long time, if ever, depending on how you want to think about it. You had The Rock come out to present the belt to the winner, arguably the biggest movie star in the world. You had one of the bigger boxing events of the entire calendar year, Canelo versus Kovalev, deliberately push back the start time to their main event so as not to coincide with the UFC event. And you had the President of the United States sitting cage side. Like, Jeff,
not in a suite or like an executive boxer suite. He was out on cage side, on the floor.
I know he spent time on the floor. He spent time back in the suite with Dana White as well. But yeah, like, the freaking president. And I'm not here to talk about your politics, whatever you think about them, man. I don't care. You don't care what I think. Fair enough. We're not here to talk about that. But that's still the president.
A president of the United States has never been live attendance on the floor for a UFC fight ever before. This is the first time in MMA history.
And for a guy like, Jeff and I have both watched this sport for a really long time. This was a surreal experience to watch all of this come together in a sport that
ESPN. And it
on
all
on freaking parts of it on freaking ESPN for a sport that I vividly remember. Look, I mean, we made jokes about the sport not being legal in New York for a long time. When I started watching this, New York was not the only state that did not legalize mixed martial arts. I remember when the UFC was running the Hard Rock Hotel, like not even the like the big casinos in Vegas. I watched some of the tough shows that were at like when I say the Hard Rock, like the Hard Rock, not hotel kind of thing, but the like actual restaurant, like those tiny little like 300, 500 seat venues. I think Anderson Silva debuted in the Hard Rock actually. I think his fight with Chris Lieben was a venue like that. But point being, and this is not, look at me, I've been here so long, but you want to understand why this was surreal? I watched that stuff.
Itself had to fight tooth and nail to get where it is. Like not just like crawl, just like fight every step of the way to get to this point. And it's pretty, it's stunning. It's like, even when the sport was becoming a lot bigger, you almost can't imagine something like this.
I really can't stress this enough. The biggest star in boxing right now, Canelo Alvarez, had his fight delayed over an hour to not conflict with this main event.
The place where I was watching this, they had the Days in Boxing fight on another TV. And it's almost like you were watching both events at the same time.
They showed this event on big screens at the Canelo Kovalev fight.
Right. So, but it's like they're just like stalling for time. They're stalling for time on one of the biggest boxing cards of the year to not run up against the Diaz-Masvidal fight. It's crazy.
Yeah. Again, this was absolutely surreal for me to watch as a guy who's watched the sport for as long as I have in that respect. Utterly insane.
Yeah. So, I mean, it just goes to show, when you think like some of the stars are falling or going away and the sport is reaching a downturn, and then this sort of fight kind of just comes out of nowhere and the stars align for sort of a crazy, surreal. Yeah, surreal is a good way to put it. This was one to remember. We'll be talking about this for a long time. But going back to that, for Masvidal, the only other fight that would be like a welterweight or a catchweight fight with McGregor, which I don't even like. I got to be honest. I don't even like that fight.
I am not terribly interested. I think Masvidal would probably take him apart.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't even like. I feel the only one that makes sense is the title fight. You have to look. Masvidal is a huge star right now, and I'm not sure his star will ever be this big or bright again. And if I'm Masvidal, I'm finally at this point. I want to fight for the title and try to become a champion because, I mean, after watching this fight, I don't hate how he matches up with Usman or Covington.
No, I would. While I might analytically, and this is before I've really done any kind of deep dive on the tape of either Usman or Covington yet, I might lean towards either of them over him. But I don't hate his chances, and I would not be surprised if he won.
Yeah, and I mean, I probably favor Usman over him more than Covington.
A little bit, yeah. Just based on stylistic choices both men make.
And maybe this fight isn't even quite as big. That title fight isn't even as big as Masvidal versus Diaz, but it would be. It wouldn't, but it would still be a big fight for them. So when McGregor's picture in this sport is very questionable, I feel like you have to sort of strike while this is one of those strike while the iron is hot situations,
Yeah, I agree.
Because this fight just happened. We hope that Covington and Usman are going to fight next month. So to me, the timing really works. Those guys will get a break. Masvidal gets a break. They'll fight. Masvidal fights the winner of the title fight. To me, it makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. Last thing I want to say about the cuts on this very briefly, and let me be clear, this is just my perspective. I was doing live commentary, watch-along stuff with Mark over the main card for this event, which you can find over on the Rattleton Broadcasting Network if you're so inclined. That cut opened up in the first and was not like that cut in the third at the end of the third is not the same as it was in the first. That cut got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as the fight went on. It also, and this has to do kind of with the arc of the cut and why I think it might be I was more okay with the stoppage than some. Look at the way it's kind of curling down over Diaz's eyebrow and in kind of towards his eyelid. That entire, I wish I had video because I could show you on myself. But that right, third or so of his eyebrow and eyelid is actually sagging down in front of it. Like he can still see out of it, or I can't say that. There is a field of vision to be had there from an outsider perspective looking in. But that whole thing is kind of slumping down. If that goes down further into his eyelid, and that whole part of his face starts falling down, do we really need to see someone's eye fall out of their head before we stop a fight, guys? Because I don't need to see that. I really don't. I was okay with it. I know a lot of people screamed bloody murder about the fight between Tyson Fury and Otto Wallin, and that fight wasn't stopped, and this fight was. Partially different commission, and don't get me wrong. If you want to scream about the lack of clear universal standards about what constitutes a fight being stopped from a medical perspective, I understand. And the fact that people in the employ of the public, because athletic commissions are state-run agencies they owe the public, those who they are supposed to represent, a greater degree of transparency than they have. I get it. But there's a couple of things about that. One, I kind of think that maybe that Fury fight should have been stopped, and that was kind of a miscarriage on the part of safety in that respect. Two, the real problems for Diaz in this fight with the cut, I think from both a visual and a mechanical perspective, came when it split through his eyebrow. The dangerous cut on Fury is not actually the big gash everyone kind of goes, oh man, they let that go. It's actually the one under his eyebrow. That's the more dangerous one because that leaks more directly into his eye and is potentially more dangerous to the musculature surrounding the eye, and that kind of helps it work. Once that kind of splits through the brow, especially if the arc of the cut is trending down more towards your eye, I tend to think that's kind of the point when, and again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not second guessing anyone necessarily. I'm pointing out what I saw and what things look like from my perspective. When those cuts start trending that direction and they're demonstrated throughout the course of the fight to be getting bigger, I'm kind of okay with it. Again, I'm not freaking out over this stoppage. Again, I know a lot of people were. I understand it wasn't the finish everyone wanted. But in all honesty, if MMA trends a little bit more towards a direction of doctor stoppages due to cuts, I don't hate that trend at the moment because, frankly, a lot of MMA fights go too long. And I say that as a fan of violence. So, again, my perspective, take it for whatever it's worth, however much you choose to give it. Good fight for as long as it lasted.
The images photo right now, and it looks pretty bad.
Yeah, there's a few
like I don't know. To me, this it looks worse than what it did on TV.
It probably does. Like there was some immediate swelling that went into it on TV, and TV has a little bit of red filters anyway. Most cameras. Mm-hmm. So there's elements of the pigmentation and whatnot that kind of gets lost. A lot of still photographs will capture a little bit better. And there's pictures out right now of Diaz after he's stitched up.
It's not just so much the size to me, but the position of where it is.
Yeah, like it's positioned badly, and the cut is continuing to open up in a bad direction.
Yeah, because as you said, he got the cut early in the fight. He had it in the first round, so they gave it 3 full rounds. So I'm not quite that upset over it. Because when I initially saw I was like, oh man, Diaz is already busted open. They could stop this fight a couple minutes into it just because of a cut. Because we've seen fights get stopped very quickly over cuts.
It does happen.
Yeah.
I mean, and I actually, again, I said this live. I didn't think the cut needed to really be looked at until after the 3rd round, because it was the 3rd round when Diaz started kind of wiping at the blood in his eye and kind of pawing at that. And when you see that, and that Masvidal kept hitting it, like at that point, I mean, again, I said this live with Mark, I'd like the doctor to at least take a look at it at this point. It seems to be becoming a problem.
What was the other thing? I mean, just in terms of the title picture too, the UFC was ready to book Masvidal against Usman for the title in the main event, and I think ESPN even reported at one point that they even looked at Masvidal versus Edwards for the title, right?
For this card?
Yeah.
Yeah, they mentioned they'd looked at that. Leon Edwards shot that down, said that wasn't the case and wasn't happening, but...
Well, this is what ESPN, reported.
Mm-hmm. I know the reports were out there. Yeah, especially
Leon Edwards shoots it down doesn't mean it wasn't talked about.
I imagine it was talked about. Again, I have no problem believing the UFC kind of went, oh crap, Nate's making a stink about his drug test. Do we have a backup?
No, this is before that. This is before they announced Diaz versus Masvidal.
Yeah, I imagine they might have considered that. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I knew they were trying to get Usman onto this card for a while.
Masvidal and his management, they have to be, just be a little patient here and wait for that title fight and try to get that title fight set up.
Oh, and Masvidal walking to the cage with boxing god Roberto Duran. That was awesome. There's actually, credit to Duran. He gave a lot of credit to Diaz. They took a couple of photos as he was leaving the cage. I think there's pictures of Duran and Trump now, actually.
I think, was Duran the guy who came into the cage with Masvidal after the fight?
Yeah, the guy with the, I forget the style of hat that it is, but...
That kind of...
Yeah, the guy that he had his arm around when he was standing there with the belt. Yeah, that's Roberto Duran.
That was Roberto. I'm like, I thought that... I didn't connect. That was Roberto Duran. But and then
again, like for those of you unfamiliar with Roberto Duran, look him up. All-time boxing great.
After the fight, he's eating the pizza, drinking booze, and he's wearing the He's wearing the Scarface suit. He's like, "Get me some more pizza, or I'm gonna end this press conference."
You know what, man? You do you, Masvidal. I will say.
Masvidal, because I never, when he was in Strikeforce, I never imagined him becoming this big UFC. I thought he'd be a decent UFC fighter, like he was kind of amounting to, but now he's a big star, so good for him.
For a guy that just kind of toiled for as long as he did, and for a guy that a lot of people who, break down a lot of tape would look at Masvidal and go, okay, there's a lot of stuff about his game that you want to show other fighters, like study how he jabs, study elements of his footwork. Like there's nothing he's bad at. It was just kind of connecting everything and then getting the mentality right consistently over the course of a full fight. That seemed to be the hurdle he was dealing with. He seems to have dealt with it now. And it is nice to see guys who just persevere and persevere and persevere finally break through like this.
We'll see how he would do against just a really well-rounded gamer like Usman. I would really want to see how he matches up with either of those guys. I really want to see that fight very badly.
Yeah, him in the title fight is going to be a fight that is rapidly gaining steam as time
Okay.
goes on.
So the worst fight of the night was Darren.
This was not the worst fight of the night.
For my money, it was the worst fight of the night. Darren Till.
It was close.
Darren Till versus Cal. We once again had two judges giving reverse scorecards, which is one of my biggest pet peeves in the sport.
Yeah, a 30-27 each way is not something that should ever realistically happen. Now,
it should never happen.
Look, I'm going to put my hand up.
I mean, to me, it was one of Gastelum's worst performances of his career. But go ahead.
Yeah, he was incredibly gun shy. Credit to Till for a few things he was doing differently. He didn't lean as much as he did down at welterweight. That's what got him caught several times. He did a lot more angling. He was very good about getting in to potential punching range, landing, and then pivoting and angling away before Gastelum could really kind of settle himself and get into a return fight. He avoided firefights. Did well in the clinch.
Dealt with the takedowns well.
Solid leg kicks. He did some damage to Gastelum's lead leg. Not a spectacular outing from Darren Till, but one of the more complete, consistent, and mature outings you've seen from him during his UFC time.
Gastelum's wrestling is very underrated. He got a couple takedowns, but he couldn't do anything with them. Till was able to get back to his feet fairly quickly, or just stay out of trouble, or just stay off of his back. So.
Yeah, he was really good about never letting Gastelum get anything approaching a control position.
It wasn't the same as when he fought Woodley.
Well, Gastelum and Woodley are also very different wrestlers, but yeah.
I mean, Till didn't impress me that much either here, but I just don't. I mean,
again, there's minutia and there's details that he did very, very well that he didn't before. But if you're talking broad picture,
these were just kind of marginal 10-9s to me. But I couldn't score this fight for Gastelum.
Yeah, again, I'll put my hand up in the air and once again say I don't necessarily always stand by how I score fights live. I was 30-27 Gastelum with live coverage.
Oh. Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Look, again,
well,
I'm not. No, look, I'm not going to stand by that. I'm really not.
I mean, I just thought it was an uneventful, just dull fight where just very little happened. And honestly, I was so underwhelmed by Till's performance. I wouldn't have been upset if he was given the loss either. Just because it was just a lulling fight where not much happened.
Yeah, whatever way and look, I think there's probably a more cogent 29-28 argument for Gastelum than 30-27, but
all right, I would cop to that, yes, but not 30-27 both ways.
Yeah, again, the scores were all over the place because this was a weird fight to score round by round. I mean, look, I think if you use the pride method of at the end of the fight, who won the fight, Darren Till. I don't think that's a terribly controversial perspective to take. But the fight itself was just kind of there, which sucks because I was looking forward to this one, and for whatever reason, just didn't kind of materialize the way we all hoped it would. Darren Till will probably fight someone else in the top 10 now, I imagine. And I don't know how he's going to match up against those guys. I
hope they don't hotshot him to the title level.
No, please. Immediately give him a shot at Stylebender just for my own amusement, because Adesanya will just smoke him. A significant setback for Gastelum.
What about
real big setback
for Derek Brunson?
For Till?
Yeah. Or Uriah Hall, even, because we were talking about that last week.
Hall, maybe. I don't think they'll do Brunson. I think they're going to have to look at guys again, let me bring up the rankings here. I think they're gonna have to be looking at somebody ranked roughly commensurate with.
After last night, I would not do Shabazian. If you want to try to give him a win.
No, we'll get to Shabazian. You could maybe they had Cannonier on hand to fill in for this fight if something happened to either guy. I think
that's a bad idea.
I mean, Cannonier should be more clearly in the title picture than he is at the moment. But I think Cannonier and Till's doable.
No way.
I mean, I think Cannonier smokes him, but
I think you got to give Till someone closer to 10 or 15 at this point.
Well, he just beat the number 4 guy. And we know how the rankings work. He's now going to be ranked number 4.
I don't think he should be number 4, though.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying how it is.
Like, Gastelum clearly isn't number 4 anymore. I would probably have Till outside of the top 5.
I mean, I would too. I would probably have him.
That's why I'm saying Ian Heinisch is number 9. Brunson is number 8.
Yeah, Heinisch will drop. I don't know. Doesn't Brunson have a fight?
He might.
Either he does or he very recently fought.
I thought he recently fought.
Yeah, because he beat Heinisch. Yeah, he beat Heinisch, right?
At 241. So.
Yeah, I would. Why is Jacare still ranked? Unranked Jacare. He's not in the division anymore.
Because it's the UFC ranking.
I know. It's these rankings are terrible.
But
if you wanted to give him a more stylistically favorable fight, but one that will be dangerous for him if it does not go his way, maybe you do Shoeface.
I'd be fine with that. I like that fight too.
I mean, again, if you don't like Darren Till, you go with like Shabazian or Romero or Cannonier.
What about Yatko?
Is Yatko still a thing?
I mean, Yatko's ranked number 15. However much that's worth.
And I don't know. I mean, again, there's a lot. I think anyone in the top 15 is probably a doable fight at this point. It would make sense.
I just don't. Till, if you're trying to invest and build and rebuild up Till to be like a contender again, I would not put him in there with a Cannonier for his next fight.
If that's the direct, I think that's correct. If you want to again invest in him and build him,
or Yoel Romero for that matter. Honestly.
I mean, look, Robert Whittaker could use a rebound fight.
I don't like that fight either.
If I'm Till, I don't like it. If I'm Whittaker, I do.
I mean, yeah.
Look, for whatever this is worth, a lot of the people in England, like a lot of the media and whatnot.
Look, Dana White was the one that said they pushed Till like too fast. Right? He was the one that said that. He's in a fight. He's in a co-main event with a former middleweight contender in a top-ranked middleweight. He walked away with a win, but it was a very uneventful, dull win. I think you still have to try. To me, he's not ready for the contender level at middleweight either, Robert. I'm sorry. He needs more time to build his confidence and to get built back up. And I think he needs to be tested more too, and we'll see how he does.
I mean, objectively, I agree.
Okay.
He's also based on a lot of the metrics that like people in the British media talk about, he's apparently, now that Bisping is retired, the most important and like most popular British fighter in the sport.
I mean, in terms of the marketability, sure, I see. I mean, he has a lot of upside. I definitely see all that. And with that in mind, I see no point to rush him back into the title picture when I think rushing him into the title picture in the first place was probably bad for him in the long run.
Yeah, I agree. I just also know the UFC does not have exactly the greatest track record of those long-term decisions. But yeah, again, much needed win for Till. Pretty significant setback for Gastelum, and especially after the weight gaff.
So here's what just to kind of go back to an old topic, ESPN reported back in September that the UFC threatened to strip Usman of the title and then book Edwards versus Usman for the vacant title. That is not Usman, Masvidal at UFC 244.
I have no issue believing they did that.
And now this is a report. This came from ESPN and Ariel Helwani. So,
however much faith you want to put in that particular person and institution.
So I'm just saying the UFC almost booked a title fight with Masvidal for last night. That's why I think he needs to be in the title picture right now.
I think that's the direction they want to go. I mean, and look, I don't have anything against Covington or Usman as people, as fighters, as personalities. Colby does a fair bit of traffic by all available metrics as a fighting personality. Usman had some momentum, but he seems to have cooled given the time off since the Woodley fight. But Masvidal is kind of the crossover star right now, and they're going to try to put him into the title picture.
Okay. So now, I don't know how you thought about this fight, but when you talk about high-level striking, stand-up, kickboxing, striking clinic, I feel like that's a good description for this next fight with Stephen Thompson and Vicente Luque.
Yeah, this one, Luque had a competitive first round, but the longer this fight went on, the more it favored Thompson.
Old school, vintage Stephen Thompson. This is a Thompson we haven't really seen for quite a while.
Well, he did a couple of things differently than he normally does, and I'm not sure what exactly precipitated this. But Thompson did a lot more standing in the pocket than he normally does this fight. He was still mobile, still did a lot of the stick and move, still a lot of flicking the jab, a lot of the same kicking game. But if you look at some of the exchanges between him and Luque, much more so than his previous fights, he's willing to get into the pocket, fire a few punches, and then instead of immediately exit, wait, either block, slip, or just get hit. And then he just extended a lot of those pocket exchanges by another couple of seconds, another exchange or two. And that's not something he's done before. It's more dangerous. He got hit more in this fight. It also did open up elements of him being able to land more consistently. So I don't know if he's just slowing down. I mean, he's like 36, I think, something like that. He's over 30. He's going to slow down. It's inevitable.
37.
37. Gee, he's almost 40. So he's 37.
Well, he started his career fairly late.
In MMA terms, yeah.
Oh no, he's 36. He's 36 actually.
No, okay.
Unless this is off, because I heard him say last night he was 37. So I don't know.
He might just be really close.
He technically turns 37 in February.
In February, yeah. So he's really close.
But yeah, he's not a spring chicken, but he's a very. He pointed out last night that they don't kill themselves in the gym. They don't.
Which is a good strategy for a lot of people. I mean, there's a very real argument to be made that the best of Michael Johnson was left in the gym after his gym wars. So again, I don't know if Thompson is just slowing down. I don't know if he saw something in Luque's game specifically that made him want to engage that way. I don't know if he's just trying something new. Like, hey, let's see if this works.
I mean, I wish Thompson looked this good against Woodley. He just looked very sharp, very technical. Like this was like the good Stephen Thompson that you like to watch fight.
Yeah. Yeah, this was technically fight of the night for this event.
What?
Yeah, this was fight of the night. A surprisingly one-sided affair. Again, that third round, and I'm going to do a mea culpa here as well. I did not give Thompson a 10-8 third round doing this live, and I absolutely should have. That's, again, mea culpa. That's on me. Really standout performance from Thompson, and he really needed one. I mean, he'd only won one fight in his previous 5.
Luque was this
6 rather.
A soft touch. He gave him a guy who was looking great going into this fight, really.
I mean, Luque was on a 6-fight winning streak and 10-2 in the UFC overall coming into this fight. Yeah, this was not a get well fight on paper for Thompson. But he absolutely made the most of it, and you know what? Again, good for him. Entertaining fight. I don't know where he goes from here because he's just in this weird spot in a somewhat weird division.
Thompson or Luque?
Thompson.
There are fights for him.
I mean, yeah, there's fights. You know, I don't hate the thought of him and Damian Maia.
I don't hate that either.
That would be the fight for that would be the battle between the two nicest guys in the sport.
What about Dos Anjos?
That's another one.
I think that's a good fight. Has Thompson? I don't think he's fought Robbie Lawler.
No, that was the fight we were all kind of expecting, but then again, Tyron Woodley upset the apple cart as far as that goes. Yeah, that's a thought.
I don't know what Lawler's situation is right now, though. So here are the ones I like.
I think they're still trying to find an opponent for him for 245. Lawler, that is.
So depending on how things go, I like the Lawler fight, Dos Anjos, Ponzinibbio. If we can get him fight ready. Pettis is Till is still ranked number 10.
Yeah, no, take Till out of the rankings, and I don't think you do the rematch with Pettis.
You see, just in terms of a matchup, I like a Dos Anjos or Lawler fight better than a Maia fight, honestly.
In a lot of ways, I agree. Because
I think, and this is no disrespect to Maia, I feel like Thompson still has some upside right now because he could still be in, like, he's almost kind of like what Carlos Condit was to this division, was like several years ago, you know? And
yeah, I can see that.
I think he's a good asset to have around in your pocket, you know, for a fight night main event, or if he can kind of be a little consistent, I think I could possibly see him having one more title run. So I like the Lawler fight.
Boy, you know what? Now that I think about it,
fight too. I mean, I just want Ponzinibbio to fight again if he can get in there. But yeah, go ahead.
You know, just as I'm thinking about Stephen Thompson as a fighter, he matches up in quite favorably with both Covington and Usman, actually. Like, part of the problem that he had with Woodley was Woodley's perpetually backing up and not really looking to engage. Both Usman and Covington tend to come forward and play into him a lot more than Woodley did.
I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind seeing either of those fights somewhere down the line. But that's going to depend on Stephen Thompson and who he gets matched up with next.
Yeah,
I think those are good fights. If they ever happen, they're good fights.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, my worst fight of you know what? No, not my worst fight of the evening. Probably the worst fight of the main card for me. Derek Lewis and Blagoy Ivanov.
The fight went about how I expected.
Yeah, they fought to a split decision win for Derek Lewis. Per usual, Derek Lewis's post-fight interview and comments are much more entertaining than anything he does in the cage. I mean, look, credit to the guy for just being a genuinely funny human being on the mic. There was not a lot here to this fight. Lewis did what Lewis always does. Throws a couple of kicks early, gasses out, spends long periods of time moving badly, sucking wind, exploding for a bit of
Like
time.
it's doing much better in the cardio.
Oh, no. Like, neither of these guys have cardio to speak of. Ivanov did a lot of backing up, which he usually does, kind of looking to counter, clinch up, look for takedowns. He got a few takedowns just into straight up side control. Unfortunately, and this is not unique to Ivanov, but I'm going to use him to make the larger point. Side control as a position is not in MMA what it used to be. A lot of guys and girls, a lot of fighters, have figured out how to utilize the reality of side control from the bottom to escape. And the lighter weight classes do it more technically. If you're Derek Lewis, you wait for Blagoy Ivanov to apply a sort of Americana badly, and then when he cranks on it the wrong way, use that motion and the fact that he's kind of coming off of you to roll through and get out. This was not a very good fight. I could see scoring it for either man. I don't care. Look, good on Lewis getting a win. Good on him having another somewhat memorable interview. Nothing as memorable as my balls was hot, but they can't all be that level of home run. Just fight. What was not a meh fight, good Lord, Kevin Lee separated Gregor Gillespie's soul from his body with a head kick 2 minutes and 47 seconds into the first round. This was a brutal knockout. I mean, yeesh. Gillespie had both men had moments of success when they were striking. Lee's jab looked good, and I mean, Lee has a freakishly long reach for the division. But Gillespie was able to kind of either eat it and land a counter or slip and land his own jab. He was landing some decent punches, but Lee just kind of got him backing up a little bit, landed a right, and Gillespie tries to circle to his own right, and his hands drop. And if I had to guess, his thought was, I'm close to the fence, and Kevin Lee tends to throw the right and then shoot a double leg. And he wanted his hands down to go to either down blocking or fighting for underhooks or something along those lines to try and defend himself against the takedown attempt. Kevin Lee did not shoot a double leg. Kevin Lee fired a left head kick, caught him square under the jaw, and he fell stiff as a board, and he was out before he hit the ground. Poor Gregor Gillespie is going to have to relearn the difference between a steelhead and a rainbow trout at this point. That was nasty. Much needed win for Lee.
That finishing combination was a thing of beauty.
Yeah, I'm gonna I've seen that same combination works a lot of the time, but that was very well executed.
Lee was in, I don't know. He looked like Gillespie owed him money.
This was Kevin Lee's first time fighting after training under Firas Zahabi. And that seems to be a pretty good fit for him, actually. I mean, look, he has one fight with him, and it resulted in a spectacular finish.
Sometimes changing things up, and it can seriously hinder a fighter, as we've seen, or it can really help them. In this case, it was the latter. So,
well, yeah, I mean, you and I had talked a little bit about how Lee seemed to be treading water and or floundering a little bit after the passing of his former head coach Robert Follis.
But also after the Ferguson fight, I think.
Well, I think that happened.
I think they kind of happened close together, didn't they? Follis and
I think it was closer. I think it was closer to the Barboza fight than the Ferguson fight.
Let's see. December 2017. So it was basically a couple months after his fight with Ferguson.
Yeah.
So it was, and he got the win over Barboza, but
oh man, yeah, he smashed Barboza. But
but
then
yeah, that's been weighing on him for a while.
Yeah, and Firas Zahabi seems like a good fit to kind of take over that head coach kind of guru position of, okay, you have all the, I'm not necessarily going to do all of your individual training, but I'm going to craft the game plan and I'm going to refine things and I'm going to kind of, point the missile, so to speak.
Zahabi's he's very good with the mental training as well. So I think it looks like a good fit for Lee, and Lee really I feel like he didn't just need a win. He needed a win, an impressive, stunning win like this to kind of show Lee has had setbacks before, but this was the first time he had back-to-back losses in his career.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So he really needed, to show why he could, he was a guy who was at the title level before, because for a while it wasn't looking like that.
I will say, since we brought up the Tony Ferguson
fight, either this time, so that was another good thing for him.
I will say this also about Kevin Lee and the Tony Ferguson fight. You remember that giant bit of staph he had on his chest in the Ferguson fight?
I remember.
Same thing in this fight. I mean, he steps on, he takes his shirt off in the prep point. He's got that same giant bulge in about that same spot, and I went,
wait, did he have staph infection again?
Did you not see have you seen the pictures of him in this fight?
I mean, I didn't.
Look at his chest.
How did you? I mean,
I don't know. I know, like he takes off his shirt in the prep point. There's that giant lump that's red. Like, oh, he's got staph again. Like, look at that thing.
Or I mean, is it a permanent? Like, what is going on here?
I don't know if it's the exact same location as the previous one. It is close.
I don't see it in the weigh-in photo.
No, look at him on Fight Night.
Okay, I see it. No, wait. Sitting next to his collar. I don't really see it here.
Oh, it's there. Hang on.
Okay, maybe this one. Maybe it's because of the lighting. Okay, I think I see it.
Yeah, it's like kind of dead center in his chest, near his near the inside of his right clavicle.
I mean, I hope it's not something more serious than staph then.
It's in a slightly different position than his previous one. I mean,
but
yeah, it's.
Just sometimes you can't fight with a staph infection. It's not.
Oh, sorry. It is my mistake. This one is much more towards his sternum, like at the top of his pectoral muscles on his right side.
I see what you're talking. I just don't. I don't know. I'm not. As I recall, Luke Rockhold was allowed to fight Weidman while dealing with a staph infection, and he was on antibiotics, as I recall.
Again, I'm just pointing out. I hope that at a bare minimum, the New York State Athletic Commission was able to reimburse Gillespie for the bathtub full of Purell he dunked himself in after the fight.
I mean, hopefully, I hope
because
it's contagious and it's very dangerous.
It absolutely is, and he visibly pretty clearly had it. I mean, I don't have anything else to say about it than hey, he got away with somehow hiding a staph bump again. I mean,
unless they knew about it and were keeping an eye on it, I don't know.
Could be. That's certainly a possibility.
Maybe, hopefully Dana White, but great fight.
Sorry, just also on the subject of people fighting with staph. From a couple of weeks ago, Luma Lukbunmi had a very obvious staph infection. Again, kind of around the collarbone in her fight as well. So, come on, guys. Staff's nothing to screw around with.
Right.
Not, please. All right. As for the prelims.
Good set of prelims.
Lot of finishes, yeah. Corey Anderson defeats Johnny Walker via TKO 207 of the first round. This is the first time Corey Anderson has had a finish in the first round in his entire UFC run, and is his first finish of any sort since he fought a comically overmatched Sean O'Connell 3 years ago.
Matt Van Buren was on the Ultimate Fighter finals.
Oh, you're right. He did finish Van Buren. My mistake. I forgot that he did that fast.
That was 5.5 years ago, or almost 5.5 years ago. So
yeah. This seems to fall into the pattern for Johnny Walker that he was living by in like Jungle Fight, when he'd have 2 or 3 really impressive finishes, and then someone with just a good kind of fundamental game would offset him, and he didn't really have an answer. So I hope he's not going to fall back into that pattern, because that's a depressing pattern for all parties. Anderson is in the title picture to one degree or another. The UFC seems to want to be leaning towards Dominic Reyes rather than Corey Anderson. I mean, Dominic Reyes is the one they've been putting in commercials and whatnot, so it kind of makes sense that way. But
now that this fight's happened, it's got to be Reyes.
He seems the most logical contender next, but Anderson is definitely in the picture at this point, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Shane Burgos defeated Makwan Amirkhani via TKO 432 of the third round. This was a beatdown. Burgos had a bit of a tough round 1. But even in that, like, Amirkhani's clearly the one using more energy, doing so improperly, and has never had a great gas tank to begin with. And Burgos just brutalized him to the body until he just kind of finally fell over in the third.
Fight almost got stopped a couple times. Amirkhani was just able to do enough to survive, but man.
Yeah. Edmund Shabazian, oh boy, in what was on paper the toughest fight of his career thus far against Brad Tavares, nope. Blew right through him with a head kick knockout in the first round, 2 minutes and 27 seconds. Edmund Shabazian is the real deal. I'm not saying champion. I'm saying future champion necessarily, but that's a guy that absolutely gets it. Definitely someone we have to pay attention to. And I have to be a little bit sad about it, because imagine how much better he'd be if he had a real coach. So jokes about Edmund Tarverdian aside. Beautiful finish, great finishing instincts from Shabazian in this fight. Just annihilated a highly ranked opponent. I mean, Darren Stewart gave this guy a tougher fight. That was actually a very, very close fight between him and Stewart. That arguably should have gone to Darren Stewart. He seems to have learned from it, though, and Shabazian keeps on rolling. At heavyweight, Jairzinho Rozenstruik defeats Andrei Arlovsky via knockout at 29 seconds of the first round. Arlovsky lunges forward, Rozenstruik with the old check left hook, and Arlovsky face plants. Rozenstruik is a legitimate prospect at heavyweight. Whether he pans out or not remains to be seen, but he's undefeated. This was his, I think, 3rd win in the UFC. Someone to at least pay attention to. Then, on the early prelims, the worst fight of the evening, Caitlin Chookagian defeated Jennifer Maia via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. Jennifer Maia missed weight for her second fight in a row. Never a good thing. Caitlin Chookagian continues to exist and have just the most uninspiring fights I've ever seen. She wants a title fight, and you know what? Here's my prediction if they make that fight. Not only will Valentina is going to win, but it looks a lot more like Valentina versus Carmouche than Valentina versus I. Because Liz Carmouche in that fight did a lot of what Caitlin Chookagian does. Shadow box. And if you'll remember that fight, and I do, Valentina just kind of let Carmouche throw a bunch of stuff that fell 4 inches short of the target, kind of going, why are you doing this? And then hit her a couple of times. It would look a lot like that, though, given Chukagian's tendency to come forward as the fight wore on, might result in more of a, might actually get you a finish. But if they make that fight, just watch Shevchenko and Carmouche again, and you'll kind of know what you're in for. Lyman Good defeated Chance Rencounter via TKO 2 minutes and 3 seconds into the third round. One of the better performances of Lyman Good's career. He looked sharp. He was landing really straight, powerful punches, good inside leg kicks, just battered Rencounter all over the cage. Real standout performance from Good. And kicking everything off, Hakeem Dawodu defeated Julio Arce via split decision. They were 29-28s. Could have gone to Arce. I think that's how I scored it, but I don't think 29-28 for either man is inherently wrong. Dawodu continues to be I don't know. I know people were high on him and it kind of hyped him up, but I never saw it. I mean, it's not that he's some kind of scrub. He's not. But I never really got what everyone else was talking about when they were, really putting him over, or he's such a devastating striker. And he's devastating to guys who don't know what they're doing, sure, but I don't know. Again, so he got a win, wasn't thrilled with his performance, and nor should he be by most appreciable metrics, apart from win or lose. And again, ho-hum fight, but not the worst fight of the evening. All right, Jeff, again, some fire on the preliminary card. What do you want to touch on?
I mean, I'm like, what is Robert Winfrey going to think when a very angry Corey Anderson just smashes Johnny Walker? Which I don't think anyone predicted or saw coming. But the Burgos destroying Americani over 3 rounds was fun. The Shabazian, Shabazian's a guy to watch out for going forward, I think. That's about it. It was a fun set of prelims, honestly. It was one of the more fun set of prelims in a while, really.
I mean, we had talked about it, last week, that this card is a very deep card. Yeah. Like there wasn't a whole lot of fat on the bone. There wasn't a whole lot of lean pickings. And again, sure, Till versus Gastelum didn't pan out. Sucks, but it happens.
Yeah.
Lewis and Ivanov was a crappy heavyweight fight, which we all predicted, and Caitlin Chukagian did Caitlin Chukagian things. But for a card that was as deep as this was, I'd almost say it even over-delivered, all things considered.
I mean, I don't really. I mean, Dana White called it a B-. I'd probably give it a B or a B+, really, just for entertainment value.
Yeah, again, the anticlimactic nature of the main event finish certainly takes away from it a little bit, and the Till Gastelum fight kind of being a dud.
Even after sleeping on it, I'm really not bothered by the main event at all. Honestly, I got what I wanted out of it.
No, I just meant a lot of people that were calling BS on it.
Yeah, and I understand, but I mean, whatever. Whatever. I think I'm generally fine with what happened.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. So, really, really solid card. Probably will wind up being the most purchased pay-per-view of the year, if I had to guess.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that was UFC 244. Thank you to everyone in the comment section of 411 Mania. Always appreciate you guys. Thank you to anyone who read without commenting. I appreciate you guys just as much. Well, I appreciate you guys a lot. I like having people to interact with. And again, I get it. If you don't have anything to say, don't say anything. I'm a lurker more often than not myself in circumstances like that. So I'm not trying to shame or pressure anybody. But it's also nice to know that I'm not completely alone when I'm doing some of these. And hey, maybe sometimes I am. I don't know. I don't see my own traffic numbers. But thank you, everyone. Again, you can find my live kind of watch along commentary with Mark if you're interested in my spoken comments on the event as it was transpiring as well. All right, and then that will lead us into this coming Saturday, UFC on ESPN Plus 21. The UFC is back in Moscow for this card, and this card, Eh. I mean, no, I mean, like, yeah. The main event was supposed to be Alexander Volkov and Junior Dos Santos, which is a good heavyweight fight. One of the few heavyweight fights that I don't hate going 5 rounds because those two know how to fight. They don't have the same cardio issues that a lot of other heavyweights do.
Greg Hardy versus Volkov?
No. Volkov and JDS.
That fight's not happening.
No, that was the original main event.
It's Greg Hardy.
I know it is now.
Don't you love that fight?
No. Anyway, JDS has a staph infection in I think it was his left leg by the shin, and he posted a picture of it, of himself in the hospital.
It was. I wish I never saw that photo.
You are a squeamish person when it comes to the deconstruction of the human body.
When you say it like that, of course I am.
Anyway.
That's not like a cute little minor statement you just made, Robert.
Look, you are, I am not. That's just kind of how that is.
Okay. It was a gruesome injury, though.
It's just a fairly typical staph abscess that ruptures and is being drained.
It wasn't minor.
No, it was not minor.
But
so
I like the main event.
Well, again, Greg Hardy steps in. Now we'll fight Alexander Volkov in the co-main event. The original co-main event of Zabit Magomedsharipov and Calvin Kattar gets bumped up to main event, though it's still only going to be 3 rounds.
I mean, that makes sense because it's a last-minute shift.
Yeah, I understand it.
I think Zabit is going to be fighting for the title at some point in his career.
It's entirely possible. He's a very dynamic fighter, and there's a lot that is good about his game. I think there's a couple of issues he needs to iron out, and there are a couple of issues specifically that Kattar might be able to key to and play into. One, Zabit always circles in the same direction, and that's not a good thing. And I don't mean in the same direction over the course of a fight. Sometimes you just have something in your opponent that means, okay, I'm almost always going to circle to the same side.
Didn't Bisping have a similar problem back in the day? I remember people talking about that with him.
His issue was more, it was easy to corral him into circling a specific direction, as opposed to he just always chose that same side. No, again, Zabit does tend to always circle the same direction, fight over fight over fight.
Good fight for both guys, though, I think.
It is. The other issue Zabit runs into, he doesn't hit hard. He has good kicks. He has a solid grappling pedigree. I mean, I'm not down on Zabit, okay? I want to be clear. But he doesn't pack a tremendous amount of punching power, which is a problem at times. He's got some he's got some habits that are potentially exploitable, and he's facing a guy in Kattar who is a very studious striker who will be able to key to those. Now, can Kattar stop Zabit from closing distance if he wants to and forcing clinch battles or exchanges on the mat? That is a potential whole other story. This is, in fact, again, this is mixed martial arts, not just kickboxing. But there's some stuff in Zabit's game that, again, needs to be acknowledged as a potential hole to be exploited, and Kattar could exploit it. I'm still leaning towards Zabit in this fight, but it's not heavily. And I would not be surprised if Kattar's the one who's able to kind of solve the puzzle, so to speak.
Zabit's going to win this. It's going to be pure domination.
It could be. Again, if Kattar can't stop him from forcing the takedown, yeah, Zabit is much better on the ground than Kattar is.
Zabit's a future title contender. Mark my words.
Okay. All right. I think we're just going to do quick hits for the rest of this card because I don't have much. Again, your new co-main event, Alexander Volkov against Greg Hardy. This is the thing about heavyweight MMA. Volkov is the better fighter in every respect. But Greg Hardy hits hard. And Volkov, we've seen him get sloppy on occasion. Again, if we're just talking about skill, this is not a competitive fight. If we're talking about the reality of heavyweight MMA, Greg Hardy certainly has options to win. I'm still picking Volkov, but if Greg Hardy lands something that finishes this, I'm not going to be surprised. Zalim Imadiev and Danny Roberts are going to fight. Imadiev has fought in the UFC before, I think. I believe probably only the once, maybe. He's 8-1 overall. Yeah, he lost his UFC debut to Max Griffin via majority decision. Had a decent enough showing, actually, though. And Danny Roberts is very up and down. And that said, he's coming off of 2 losses, so it might be time for him to be up again. I'm going to pick Imadiev, but that's actually a well-matched fight, all things considered. Ramazan Emeev will fight Anthony Rocco Martin. This is a good fight. I think this is the only other fight I'm going to say that about on this main card. But Emeev is from Azerbaijan. Flags, man. I couldn't see the red stripe in the middle. From Azerbaijan, 3-0 in the UFC. Jeez, I forgot he'd fought that many times. Yeah, 3-0 in the UFC, getting a step up against Rocco Martin, who should have had a draw against Damian Maia. Like, the fact that Maia got that decision is just a miscarriage of the scoring criteria as currently understood. I don't think he won, but that should have been a draw. I'm picking Martin here, but again, that's a pretty good fight, actually. At light heavyweight, Shamil Gamzatov. Here's this gentleman from Russia. Okay. I'm going with Gamzatov until I hear otherwise. Undefeated, making his UFC debut. Had a pretty good run in the PFL, actually, as well as ACB. So dude's kind of been around. He's fighting Klidson Abreu, who is 15-3 and 1-1 in the UFC. And he's coming off a win over Sam Alvey, which means very little. I'm actually going to go with Gamzatov there, but I could be wrong. All right. The rest. What else do we have? Ed Herman. This might be in a different spot on the card than this. Ed Herman and Hadis Ibragimov will fight. Ibragimov 8-1, lost his UFC debut to Daun Jung. Boy, he got put through the wood chipper in that fight.
Ed Herman's been in the UFC since 2006.
When he lost a split decision to Kendall Despida Grove in the finale of The Ultimate Fighter Season 3. Herman beat Patrick Cummins his last fight. I imagine he'll win if he doesn't get overwhelmed early, because Ibragimov is kind of a charge out, swing for the fences, gas out if I don't get it kind of guy. Magomed Ankalaev is back against Dalcha Lungiambula. That's interesting matchmaking, actually. Lungiambula had a solid debut when he beat Daquan Townsend. He smashed that guy in the 3rd round. But Ankalaev is a real grinder and a real tough guy to get out of there. I'm going to go with Ankalaev, actually, but interesting matchmaking there. Rustam Khabilov is still around and will be fighting Sergey Handosko. Handosko's fought in the UFC before, won his debut against somebody, Rustam Akhman. Whereas Khabilov has been in the UFC for a fair bit at this point. What's he done recently? Lost to Diego Ferreira in February of this year. And Khabilov's a guy who just had just can't seem to maintain momentum, even when he has a giant winning streak. I'll probably pick Khabibulov for that fight, but don't be surprised if Sergey pulls that one off. Roman Kopylov will fight Carl Robertson. Kopylov is undefeated, making his UFC debut. Whereas Robertson has fought in the UFC a couple of times. Has been trading wins and losses. Probably go with Robertson there, but I'm not sold on that. Grigory Popov will fight Davey Grant. Popov, he's fought in the UFC before. Yeah, he fought Eddie Wineland and had kind of a barn burner for as long as it lasted, despite losing. I remember that, now that I think about it. And Davey Grant is kind of here to make Popov look good. Grant's lost his last 2 fights. He's only 1-3 in the UFC. Jeez. Excuse me. I'm going to butcher this guy's first name. Abubakar Nurmagomedov will fight David Zawada. Zawada's fought in the UFC a couple of times, 2 losses. Whereas Nurmagomedov is making his UFC debut. Coming up he fought Bojan Velichkovic to a draw in PFL last year. Been off for a while, over a year actually. Go with Nurmagomedov. Zawada's just kind of been a body. Alexander Yakovlev will fight Roosevelt Roberts. Yakovlev had some potential at some point, but he's never really been able to put everything together. By contrast, Roberts, coming off of, I believe, the first loss of his career, against Vince Pichel. So Yakovlev might be able to just kind of smother him with grappling, but I kind of like Roberts' chances there. And then kicking everything off, Jessica Rose Clark will fight Pani Kianzad. This fight exists on this card for reasons nebulous to the thinking person. Kianzad lost her return to the UFC, technical return to the UFC, earlier this year. Whereas Clark lost to Jessica Ai in her last fight out, but actually put up a decent enough performance in that. She hasn't fought since June of 2018, though. I'll go with Rose Clark. With Clark. Her first name is hyphenated, not her last name. I apologize. Pani Kianzad is just kind of a journeyman-style body at this point to plug into cards like this. All right, Jeff, again, that's your card such as it is. Anything stand out to you?
Nothing else to add.
Alrighty, then let us move on. Let's see here. Again, kind of a slow news week, but let's start with this. Because there was news made, Conor McGregor reached a plea deal in his assault case stemming from him punching that old dude in the bar. He avoids jail time, pays, I think, like $1 million. Oh, do they use pounds or euros? I forget what Ireland uses.
The face by Conor McGregor. Bar.
Especially since apparently he can't punch if you're not actually moving towards him. The old guy just got punched and went back to drinking.
Why did he ever say why he punched that guy?
He refused a shot of McGregor's whiskey.
I mean,
like, McGregor tried to buy a round for the bar. The old man said no. McGregor's ire got up and he hit him. Like, I think that's the loose sequence of events there. I mean, I'm sure there were words exchanged as well, but yeah, so McGregor, no jail time, pays $1 million to the $1 million fine. I say dollar. I forget what unit of currency they use. I can't remember if it's pounds or euros. Insert unit of currency there. 1 million of it.
As they say, a fool and his money are easily parted.
That is true.
I have to get in a situation where I'm offered whiskey by McGregor and turn it down and get punched in.
Well, I mean, in fairness, he didn't pay the old man the $1 million. That was just his like civic fine.
Oh, so the guy doesn't get anything?
I don't know the specifics of the situation. He might have paid him like personally, but I don't think any of the fine goes to him.
You know, John Jones basically admitted he paid like $1 million to that pregnant woman he hit in the hit and run, probably to avoid a civil lawsuit.
And look, if that's what two private parties want to do in the terms of again, if Conor paid the old guy not to sue him in civil court, then fair enough. Like, I don't actually think that's anything unethical or illegal or what have you.
Well, like what John Jones did to that woman was very unethical.
Well, no. Look, the hit and run, absolutely. But if he like preemptively goes to her and says, "Look, I'll cut you a check for $1 million, sign this NDA, no legal action, and the dispute between you and I is officially settled," kind of thing, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
So apparently, elements of the Irish media are very unhappy with this, but
why would you be unhappy?
There's a lot of people who don't like Conor.
But I mean, the sexual assault investigations, which are sort of,
ongoing investigations.
They're ongoing. We don't know what's happening too much about what's happening with those. But I mean, this is sort of how I saw it getting resolved. It seemed like one of Conor's recent offenses, this was one of his lesser offenses.
In some ways, yes.
Yeah.
All right. Regarding hang on very briefly. Regarding the middleweight title picture.
Yeah.
Paulo Costa, I think logical next title contender, next challenger, will be out. He's undergoing some surgery on his biceps. I forget which one.
Mm-hmm.
And is going to be out for a bit while he's dealing with that injury and recovery process.
Time for a catchweight super fight with John Jones.
I don't think they're going to do that. I think it's more likely that they try to give him a title defense and that they just plug in somebody else.
Let's see. I mean, Darren Till.
Again, look, I mentioned it. I think Stylebender would smash him, but
I mean, outside of
believe it or not,
the next in line is Cannonier.
Cannonier's possible. I've seen a lot of people toss around the possibility of Yoel Romero, which I don't hate, in all honesty.
Yeah, but how many back-to-back losses does Romero have at this point?
Just the 2, I think.
Only 2?
I think that's it.
I don't like, but he lost 2 back-to-back, and he missed weight against Whitaker in a title fight.
Yeah, and I'm not saying there's not downside to it. I'm saying that's something that I've seen bandied about, and I'm intrigued by the matchup more than anything else.
I mean, I guess you could arguably do it.
And I mean, it's not like he lost to Paulo Costa in his last fight by some great margin. He arguably won.
I don't know. That could be a tough matchup for Adesanya.
And I think that's kind of where the intrigue stems from. It's not Romero is in many respects his own animal when it comes to what you get when you step into the cage. And how he matches up with Adesanya, I personally find very intriguing. But again, it's kind of wide open. So if somebody over the next 2 months does something spectacular, now would be a good time to make a move because your presumptive number 1 contender is out of the picture for a while. And I think the last thing I had that I kind of wanted to bring up that we can just laugh about. I don't even know how to start this. Diego Sanchez is apparently a free agent.
So he's signing with Bellator.
I don't know. I don't know what to say about this.
I just wish he retired after that last win.
I wish he'd retired 18 years ago.
Okay.
Means I never would have had to watch him fight.
You're mean.
I've seen too many Diego Sanchez fights. I don't like.
I can understand that, but I mean, I still have compassion for the man.
Well, look, if he'd retired 18 years ago, his brain wouldn't be as fried as it is.
Well, he just thinks outside the box.
I mean, no, he thinks outside, not just outside the box. Like, if the box exists within three-dimensional space, Diego Sanchez thinks outside the concept of space as an entity.
Diego Sanchez told MMA Junkie he still wants to fight in the UFC.
If I were the UFC, I'd let him walk. He's of no value to you. He is a walking PR nightmare at this point, nothing else.
No, he told this to Luke Thomas's show. All right. Well, aside from that, I don't really have much else to say about that. The New York State Athletic Commission ruled that Kelvin Gastelum did violate the rules at the UFC 244 weigh-ins, and they are seeking disciplinary action for his. The policy states you cannot be touching anyone when you're weighing in, and he clearly violated that.
Sure do wish they'd have enforced that against Cormier.
Well, Robert, this policy was instituted because of the Cormier incident.
In all seriousness, that's a common sense policy that should be in place everywhere. Look, yeah, Gastelum is technically touching one of the commission officials that's holding the towel he's in front of him as he's weighing in. If there's a minor procedure in place for instances where this doesn't seem to have been this doesn't seem like it was a terribly deliberate thing. It doesn't seem to have substantively affected a whole lot. If there's a small fine associated with this or whatnot, or some kind of scaling fine system where if you do it once, it's minor. If you keep doing it, we escalate punishment. Look, he is technically in violation of the rules. As long as the punishment is, commensurate to the infraction, I'm okay with this. Granted, that might be giving the New York State Athletic Commission too much credit in terms of how they behave themselves when it comes to adjudicating it, but why was my issue with this is why nothing happened at the time. This blew up right after it happened, and why was no one noticing this as it was happening or said anything? Any number of reasons. The guy might not have noticed he was touching him.
All right, but they have commission officials there watching like a hawk. This is their job, is it not?
They have somebody looking at the scale. I'm not sure they had someone dedicated to watching how the fighter behaves himself on it, him or herself. Okay. I don't know. I genuinely don't know why this went unremarked upon live.
Well,
seems like an oversight.
If the commission says you can't be touching anyone or anything, then he was in violation of the rules. Whether that elbow, did it really? Because he weighed in at 184, and did that weight distribution cause him to weigh less, you think? Or cause him to weigh less on the scale?
Almost by definition, if he's putting weight on something else, it's going to have some kind of an effect.
Right. Well,
exactly how much is hard to determine.
Well,
with just an eyeball test like that.
There's a lot. This kind of thing comes up with Gastelum repeatedly, and it's disappointing.
Yeah, his weight cut seems to have been mistimed. relative to this event. He weighed in with like 1 minute left to go officially.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what he's got to sort out, but for crying out loud, sort it out, man.
Right.
Like, you're a professional. You've been in the UFC for several years at this point. This shouldn't still be happening.
I think that's about it for just major news items.
Alrighty, let me refresh Twitter. See if anything crazy has happened over the last 2 hours or so.
Corey Anderson says UFC can release him if promotion continues skipping him for the title shot. All right, throw the weight around, Corey.
Yeah, buddy. I mean, look, this is the closest thing he's ever had to actual leverage in the MMA space. Go for it. Nate Diaz is complaining that the cut in the Masvidal fight is the same cut that he had in the Pettis fight, and that fight was allowed to continue. It's the same scar tissue. It is not the same cut.
Not the same type of cut.
Well, same cut again. It's in the same location, but there's differences to it that. I mean, again, if you want to say it's the same cut, it is the same batch of scar tissue over the same eye in approximately the same generalized shape. We're not talking in generalities. We're talking in specifics.
LFA is going to be on UFC Fight Pass now, so they have a new broadcast deal after getting shoved off of Access TV. So good for them.
Good for them. Happy that promotion is going to continue to exist. Credit, I suppose, to Canelo Alvarez for knocking out Sergey Kovalev in the 11th round last night.
Do you have anything to say about the Novitzky's public statements about the whole Diaz thing went down?
I don't want to be here for another hour while we discussing it, but
it was a crazy story.
I suppose we can briefly. Novitzky, correct? I want to spell his name properly.
Itzky.
Novitzky. Thank you.
No, Itzky.
ZKY. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure it would still come up the other way, but
I just want to make sure I accredit the man properly.
But Novitzky in a media scrum, I think he said he was the one who told Diaz to keep it quiet, but that was because of USADA's policy where they don't make announcements about the testing until later, because they don't want because fighters were getting branded as cheaters unfairly. So that was the change to that policy.
Well, there's that, but look,
there are relevant questions I feel like he's not getting asked.
Well, here's kind of the big thing about this that needs to be said, and I'm going to, just because I want to give credit, I'm going to be somewhat cribbing from Luke Thomas's discussion on the subject. My opinion is not the same as his, but I just want y'all to have the proper frame of reference for this. If you haven't seen his take on it, I would encourage you to do so. It's worth your time. But the big takeaway from Novitzky mentioning some of this was that he essentially no longer believes that strict liability is the best policy for anti-doping to use. Now, for those unfamiliar with strict liability as far as this goes, strict liability as a concept comes from tort law. If you are strictly liable for what happens, that means you are liable regardless of anything else. So again, there's a lot of examples for this. So if you are this is purely hypothetical, I'm not an expert on this, but if you are the, say, demolitions expert for something that needs demolitions expert, I don't know, a mining company, some such, and you follow every safety procedure, and the area is properly cordoned off, everyone's been warned, but some drunk, stupid teenager wanders into the blast zone and gets killed because of it. If strict liability is in play, you're the demolition expert. You're the one responsible. It doesn't matter that the drunk teenager broke the law, violated safety protocol, and you did everything by the book. Strict liability has been the express. What's the word I'm looking for? It has been the standard of responsibility / liability that anti-doping has been imposing on people. And Novitzky's position at this particular point seems to be, and bear in mind, Novitzky is not associated with USADA. He is a UFC employee. The thing that kind of surprised people was he came out and said, given the sophistication of testing at this point, because when a lot of strict liability kind of methodology or I hate to say jurisprudence because that is not the word, but it kind of conveys the sentiment. When that was in place,
my question is: him taking that stance going to change the regulation and policy on this?
No, he has no say over what USADA does. Jeff Novitzky is a UFC employee.
Right.
USADA USADA oversees significantly more than the UFC.
What is the point here?
Here's what's probably going to happen, if I had to guess. Sorry, just to kind of finish my point. Novitzky's point seems to be, with testing now being able to detect things down to the picogram instead of simply at the nanogram level, which is several orders of magnitude more sensitive, and the general, and this is kind of like his words, contamination of the world, this might not be the appropriate kind of ideology to have in place behind it. Here's the thing about this. If I had to guess what's going to happen.
Change the regulation and policy through USADA, then I don't really see what difference are we how are we going to fix this?
Well, again, if I had to guess, here's the thing. USADA's governing policies are a little bit odd because the vast majority of what they oversee is amateur competition, amateur competitors trying to be eligible to compete on the international stage for world championships or the Olympics. USADA can't change broad sweeping policy as it pertains to those athletes without just almost de facto disqualifying them from participation under IOC guidelines. That's the International Olympic Committee. Everything they do as it pertains to amateur boxers, cyclists, track and field, the whole 9 yards, everything they do for them has to conform to World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, or the IOC guidelines. If they don't, everyone tested under USADA's policies can be disqualified from international competition for not being in line with these standards and practices. And you ain't gonna tell a gymnast who's been you try telling a 18-year-old gymnast who's been training 120 hours a week, more probably, since they were 6, that, sorry, we're changing our policy to be more amenable to professional fighters. You no longer are eligible to compete on the international stage in your chosen sport. That ain't going to go over. Just not. What's most likely to happen, if I were to guess, USADA will simply implement specific policy changes relative to the UFC. If they're going to change anything at all.
Okay. Well,
I mean, the UFC can just ignore USADA's sanctions. They choose to enforce them. They do not have to.
This is a very I feel like Pandora's box has been opened here.
That is an apt metaphor.
And I get why people are angry, but I mean, I still blame them.
Again, there was a lot of pearl clutching, there was a lot of sensationalizing, and there was a problem. I mean, and there is a real. How do I phrase this?
People wanted a clean. People thought the sport was dirty, or they claimed it was dirty.
Yes, I mean, sports are dirty.
And then people held up this idea that we needed regulation and we needed year-round random testing. They got it, and now everyone's ticked off about it. That's just kind of my reading of all this.
That is an accurate summation of events from where I sit.
And then Pandora's box was open, and now we have almost, I feel like, now that Pandora's box has been opened, I feel like it's gone. It's almost like micromanaging in a sense to me, like it's gone too far, basically. But it's happened because we had this attitude that the sport had to be cleaned up and everyone was cheating or using some sort of PEDs, and we needed to do something about it. And I feel like those people brought this element on themselves. Like, we had all these outspoken people talking, fighters, the media, what have you, saying we need year-round random testing, and guys are cheating and getting away with it. We're not vigilant enough, and now I guess we're too vigilant. But I'm just.
Well, there's also an open question about whether or not it's effective to begin with.
Sure. I don't know what honestly, I don't know what the answer is, but I just feel like we have people not taking responsibility for their role in this.
That's probably fair. I mean, again, I have no issue with saying, again, I was one of those guys who kind of thought, maybe we should have something more like year-round testing. And again, I'll own up to that, and I'll just say my position has changed since then.
In TRT era Vitor, no one would shut up about TRT. And now we're like, man, don't you miss TRT Vitor? Is kind of the sentiment I get.
I mean, I don't miss TRT Vitor specifically, but
not from you, but some contingents of the fandom. And then look, you have Luke Thomas is the guy that said, I want, like, basically he's like, I want to see excellence inside the cage. Basically not caring if guys are using something.
Well, I think the big deal, and I've said this before, and I think it's probably correct. If fighters had an organization that negotiated on their behalf, them and the UFC all got together, came up with a policy everyone could live with, the fans would fall in line, and a lot of this discussion would go away.
Now, I am in favor of that, but that's up to the fighters if they want to make that happen. Just
Absolutely.
It's like negotiations, unions, and collective bargaining. It's not, to me, it's not dissimilar to what happened with the WWE. Now, look, I don't know all the ins and outs of what happened with WWE in Saudi Arabia, but the rumor, this is just a rumor, WWE's story is that there were mechanical issues preventing the from leaving, but the issue is that there was some sort of disagreement with the General Sports Authority in Vince McMahon, where apparently the Saudi Arabian government had not paid the WWE what they were promised for their events and programming, and Vince apparently cut the feed of Crown Jewel, and so Saudi Arabia. This is the rumor. This has not been confirmed, like, legitimately. Like, this is what the dirt. Yes, the dirt sheets are saying that, like, the Saudi Arabia basically grounded the flight and wouldn't let the WWE superstars leave. Now, the reason I mention this is because, like, professional wrestlers, like, they don't have a union to speak up for them and handle things.
They're not even employees.
Right. So my point is
fighters, actually.
My point is they were not if there's any truth to this at all, Robert, they were not treated fairly here, and that was messed up. That they were treated as pawns in a game between the Saudi Arabian government and Vince McMahon, who who it seems basically entered a bad faith deal with
a murderous dictator.
You said it, not me.
I'll say it. He is.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, basically that. So, and WWE went ahead with this deal after what happened where the government basically did a state-sponsored murder of a journalist. Is his name Jamal Khashoggi? I don't.
Khashoggi, I believe, is the pronunciation.
I'm sorry if I mispronounced that.
It's a.
But again,
I'd say it's a weird name, but it's a pronunciation you have to hear.
Just like with wrestlers, if that is something they want or desire, it is on them to make it happen, not on the UFC. They have to, if they want to have a say in the USADA regulation, they have to band together and demand it. That's the only way it would change.
Yeah, look, there's a reason USADA oversees no other professional sport in the world.
Now, as for Jeff Novitzky, what he said last week, I mean, he seems like a rational human being.
Depends on the day.
I mean, other than that, I feel like there are a lot of relevant questions that aren't being asked of him. I mean,
wasn't he the guy who was like going through Barry Bonds' garbage?
That's what I heard. I've heard that story. I don't know if it's actually true. Just kind of like that whole Lisa Nawak story, like wearing diapers when the police pulled her over. There's apparently that's not the actual version of events, but that's like, astronaut in a diaper and all that, Became a movie with Natalie Portman, and she doesn't even wear a diaper in the movie. I don't know if that's true, but I'm just saying, like, I hear the things he's saying and I understand what he's getting at, basically. But I don't know. The whole situation annoys me.
Yeah, it is one that profoundly and negatively affects the sport by and large and the experience of the fans more than anything else.
But it's just that when I hear the commentators and the radio host guys, these were some of the same people screaming about drug testing before USADA came along. Screaming.
I mean, look, drug use
on you and all that.
Look, drug use in any sport, even those overseen by institutions like USADA, is by almost every self-referential anonymous survey they do somewhere around 40 to 60%.
Okay. No one, but I mean, before USADA came along, no one was buying tainted supplement excuses. I'm sorry.
Well, they also weren't utilizing terribly sophisticated testing and weren't necessarily failing for the same things.
Well,
the substances being failed for under commission testing were different.
I think we've talked enough as much as we can about it for now, but it's going to be an evolving, continuing problem, I feel.
Look, this is going to be a problem until the fan base revolts to the point where it is no longer tenable from a public relations standpoint for the UFC to stay in the deal with USADA, or fighters collectively force the UFC's hand.
That was the same situation that led to USADA. It was those same circumstances.
Yeah, and until something similar happens again, and I don't think the reality is I don't think it will. I don't think any bit of the fan base large enough or loud enough is going to get up in arms over this. There's not.
All right.
I mean, look at the reaction to Paulo Costa saying he needed bicep surgery. Half the people said, "Oh, bull, he's cycling off of the roids again." Like, the MMA fandom is not in a sophisticated enough position generally to have a nuanced discussion about the values of anti-doping at the moment.
Sure. All right. I think we can move on then.
And in all fairness, that's part of the reason I think, shows like you and like this one, despite being a smaller profile, I don't mind talking about it on occasion because we're not screaming about it anymore, thank God. We used to. Like, again, I'm happy to put my hand in the air. I used to be part of the problem.
We can have more nuance about this discussion here. But yes. All right. So
that's all I've got. So I think we can get into plugs, unless there's something else.
The greatest movie of the year, Playing with Fire, starring John Cena.
Just don't.
Other reviews coming up. One I am very excited about, Ford versus Ferrari. I'll be reviewing that, and probably the Charlie's Angels reboot we've been dying to see for the last 16 years.
I said no one ever.
Starring is it Kristen Stewart?
Yep.
I believe Elizabeth Banks is directing. Yeah, Kristen Stewart. Elizabeth Banks is directing this one, so yeah.
She plays Bosley too, right?
I'm not. I haven't followed this version too much, but as far as a Bosley casting goes, yes, she is playing Bosley. So yes, so probably reviewing this one. So hooray!
Good luck and Godspeed.
Actually, there are two people as Bosley in the cast. I don't know how accurate this IMDb cast list is. Yay! So hooray! We got new Charlie.
Jeez, no one asked for this. Literally no one.
I mean, I didn't even like the McGee ones, honestly.
I could the first one's kind of an occasional guilty pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
This Full Throttle is just the dirt worst.
Right.
And then
the first one at least has Bill Murray in it.
Yeah, like the first one has and Sam Rockwell.
Right.
Like there's some enjoyable stuff to the first one.
Sure.
In a guilty pleasure kind of way, but who's crying for a Charlie's Angels reboot in 2019?
So I'll be reviewing those and John Cena's new movie, which I have already seen.
I hope you drank a lot.
I did not. I drank water, and look, it's John Cena doing Hulk Hogan's Mr. Nanny or The Pacifier with Vin Diesel. So,
look, I'd rather watch Mr. Nanny.
I mean, the less said, the less said, the better. So, but I am very excited about Ford vs. Ferrari. That movie looks good. I don't know if it'll be fantastic, but it looks very good. So I hope it's a good movie. So, and then that's about it. Yeah, that's it for me this week. Thank you, Robert.
All right, as for myself, again, you can find my full report of UFC 244 in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. Same place you might have found this podcast, actually. Wherever you found this show, thank you very much for having done so. We're on YouTube, the 411 Mania website, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Stitcher, Transistor. Basically, wherever you get your podcast, you can find us. So please subscribe so you can stay updated. I might be trying a thing in the near future. Well, with like a kind of like bonus or extra content under this umbrella. I don't know. I'm thinking about trying it out. Might crash and burn, but hey, wouldn't be the first time I've done something like that. Mark Radulich and I recorded live watch-along commentary for UFC 244's main card, which you can find over on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network. We also did live commentary for Canelo versus Kovalev. Such as it was, Mark was very, very tired at that point. This Tuesday on Damn You Hollywood, myself and Mark, and I think Alexis Hana, I'm not sure, she might be, we'll be talking about Terminator Dark Fate, which I have not yet seen, but will shortly, and we'll talk about it, whether it was good or bad. It seems to have opened a little bit flat financially, so we'll have a look and have a full review of it. this Saturday, I believe morning. I don't know the full start time for the UFC Moscow card because I think they're doing it prime time in Moscow. So we'll see. I will have coverage of that in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania. So please stop by, say hello. I really do appreciate it whenever you guys do. Even if all you do is want to, come in and say something minor and then be on your way because this card does not look terribly compelling, I completely understand. We will be back here next week. We'll have a review of UFC. I think we just have the review next week of the Moscow card because no, we will be previewing. So 9th. Yeah, we will be previewing UFC on ESPN Plus 22 next week. This is their card in Sao Paulo, headlined by Jan Blachowicz and Ronaldo Souza. Also on this card, Mauricio Shogun Rua will fight Paul Craig. Surprisingly interesting fight, that, actually. Charles Oliveira and Jared Gordon's not a bad fight. Francisco Trinaldo and Bobby Green. That'll go underappreciated. Wow, Renan Barão still with the UFC. He's fighting Douglas Silva de Andrade. Man, poor Barão. Just, oof, that man's career. Anyway, we'll talk about all of that next week and give you a full preview. I remember the other thing. Look, I have an unbelievably small audience here, all things considered. But apparently Walt Harris's stepdaughter has been the victim of some kind of foul play, abduction, and they're offering a lot of some reward money for anyone who might have information about that. On the off chance that one of the few people that listen to this does know anything, please contact the relevant authorities. That's a terrible, terrible thing. He's at the moment, I believe he's pulled out of his fight. He was supposed to be part of the main event for the ESPN card in a few weeks. And for whatever value you want to ascribe to them, I'm a religious person, so I do think they carry weight. Thoughts and prayers are with that particular family as they're going through this. And it's a terrible thing. Sorry to end on a downer there, guys, but hey, the world sucks sometimes. What do you want me to say? We'll be back next week. Hope you will all as well. Again, apologies for the downer ending. Until then, thanks again. Stay safe out there, and please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.